Chapter 32.
Turtles!
The following is excerpted from the Heathcliff disaster hearings, held 3 months after Tamaya was carried out into the woods. Senator Wright, were you able to determine if these organisms were in fact the same as the organisms that you used in BioWing?
Dr. June Lee, research scientist, National Institute of Health. The DNA is nearly identical, but not exact. We believe that they are mutated strains of the bioline organisms.
Senator Foutte, but there are millions of different kinds of microorganisms living on this planet.
Yes,
And most of these have never been studied?
that's true. Scientists have identified only about 5% of all of the microbes in this biosphere.
So it isn't possible that the organisms found in the fuzzy mud could have evolved naturally from one of these unknown microbes?
No, that is highly unlikely.
But not impossible?
Highly unlikely. If it had evolved naturally, then almost certainly it would have adapted to the cold climate.
What caused the mutation? How did it happen?
I can't say. Every time a cell divides, there's a very small possibility of a mutation. But with billions upon billions of divisions occurring all the time, mutations will happen. It's inevitable.
How did this supposedly mutated organism get from Sunray Farm to the woods of Heathcliff?
Again, I don't know. A bug, a bird, a wind current, anything could have brought it.
Even if all you say is true, Dr. Lee, the important question is this. Is the original organism dangerous? I'm talking about the one currently used in BioWing, not the mutation. Is it dangerous either to people or to this environment?
No, since the original organism cannot survive in oxygen, it supposes no danger. But, like I said, mutations will occur. As far as what those future mutations may be, I cannot say. But there will be more mutations. That is a certainty.
Thank you, Doctor, for your testimony and for your work at NIH. The country is very grateful that you and your agency were able to find a cure for this horrible disease.
Thank you, but actually it was Dr. Crumbly, a local veterinarian, who discovered the cure. We at NIH helped in the testing and mass production, but it is Dr. Crumbly who deserves your credit.
Excuse me, did you say that Dr. Crumbly is a veterinarian?
Animals suffer just as badly as humans. If it weren't for Dr. Crumbly, I suppose the future of the earth would have been ruled by turtles.
Chapter 33. Frankengerms. The man who rescued Tamaya did find out soon enough. The whole world found out about the mud. Within hours of the children's rescue, everyone who had been involved in the search began showing signs of the rash, redness, small bumps, and a tingling sensation. By the next morning, many of these bumps had turned into blisters, and people awoke to find a mysterious powder that colored their skin on their bed sheets. As it turned out, the powder was their skin, what was left of it after the mutated organisms ate the good parts. 1 week after Tamaya, Chad, and Marshall were found in the woods, there were more than 500 cases of the rash in the town Heathcliff. After 2 weeks, the number had grown to 15,000. Many people didn't seek treatment until it was too late. One of the most insidious things about the rash was that there was no pain, just a mild tingling. Normally, nerve cells send a pain message to the brain, but the microorganisms ate through that portion of the cell that transmits the message. It was like a telephone line had been cut. The nerve cells were screaming, but the brain never got the message. About the same time that Tamaya, Marshall, and Chad were being loaded into an ambulance, the searchers found the dead body of a person who had been living in the woods, a man with a very long beard. The 3 lost children were rushed to Heathcliff Regional Hospital. Samples of the mud were taken from Tamaya's hair and clothes and sent to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, and to the National Institute of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. Photos of her hand and arm, as well as Chad's face, were emailed to those agencies as well. The doctors at the hospital searched the medical books and internet, but could not find any record of this type of rash. There was no known cure. The best they could do for Tamaya was to keep her extremely clean. She was thoroughly washed. Her hair was cut off and her head was shaved. For the next few weeks, she was giving round-the-clock sponge bath. Every 2 hours, morning, noon, and night, the nurse would wash her with rubbing alcohol. After each bath, she had to rinse her mouth with a special mouthwash. It stung and tasted terrible, and she had to keep it in her mouth for a minute before they allowed her to spit it out. She didn't mind one bit. It tasted strong. Her mother, and then later her father, came to visit, although they weren't allowed to touch her. She told them she was sorry, but they kept on telling her how proud they were of her. Later, as the epidemic spread through Heathcliff, all visitors were banned from the hospital, including her parents. She could still talk to them via cell phone, which her father had given to her. Her vision didn't deteriorate any further. If she held her hand in front of her face, she could see it was her hand. But that might have been because she already knew it was her hand. Her doctor tried various other shapes and objects. She could correctly identify a circle, square, triangle, but when he held up a woman's high-heeled shoe, she guessed it was a banana. She asked often about Marshall and Chad. She heard Marshall was doing fairly well, but she wasn't allowed to see him. Chad was in serious condition. That was all she could find out. She was told that if he had arrived at the hospital even 20 minutes later, he probably wouldn't have survived. She never complained. Sometimes when she felt scared, she'd repeat herself the 10 virtues that she'd been made to memorize at Woodbridge Academy. Charity, cleanness, courage, empathy, grace, humility, integrity, patience, and prudence, temperance. Partly she thought that if she was really, really good, then the rash would go away and she'd be able to see again. Deep down, she was also preparing herself for the worst. In case she didn't get better, she wanted to be able to face the world with courage, patience, and grace. She learned to recognize her different nurses, not only by their voices, but by the sounds they made when they entered the room to give her another sponge bath. Everyone continued to assure her that the best scientists in the country were working on a cure. Everyone acted so calm and reassuring around her. It was only when she talked to Monica that she found out that the rest of the world was totally freaked out. The fuzzy mud's everywhere, Monica told her. Schools closed, not just Woodridge, all schools. No one goes outside. I'm not even supposed to talk to you because my mom's afraid the frankengerms will come through the phone. Everyone calls it fuzzy mud, the term Tamaya had used when she'd arrived at the hospital. Even the scientists, who could be seen throughout Heathcliff, dressed in their hazmat suits, called it that. Dr. Humbird, a former employee of Sunray Farm, appeared on all the cable news shows, which was probably why the mutated organisms were now be called frankengerms. The hospitals ran out of room, and schools were turned into rash treatment centers. Cots were set up in classrooms and cafeterias. Sheets were hung to provide privacy for round-the-clock sponge baths, administered by dedicated nurses who also wore full hazmat. The president ordered that Heathcliff and the surrounding area be put under quarantine. No one was allowed to leave. Whether or not they showed symptoms of the rash, the airport and railroads were closed. The Pennsylvania National Guard patrolled the roads and highways. Chapter 34. Tuesday, November 23rd. Miss Marple lay in a crate in Dr. Crumley's office. Dr. Crumley stood alongside the crate, a hypodermic needle in his hand. He was glad the poor dog was sleeping. She didn't suffer when she was asleep. Part Australian Shepherd, part Chow, and part who knows what. Miss Marple used to have thick gray fur with white, black, and brown spots. Most of her fur had fallen out. Her naked skin was covered in blisters. She'd become deaf and blind. In her dream, Missy was running through the woods. All senses were on full alert as she searched for the lost children. Leaves flew up as she dashed over them. She barked in joyful triumph and licked the lost girl's face. To Dr. Crumley, the triumph barks of her dream sounded like pathetic whimpers. He carefully opened her crate so as not to wake her. He worked alone now. 2 of his vets had come down with the rash, and he'd ordered the others to stay home. He wore gloves and boots, but not a hazmat suit. He didn't want to scare the animals. Miss Marple somehow sensed his presence. Her tail gave a weak thump against the bottom of her crate. "Hey, girl," he said, and petted the dog, wishing he didn't have to wear gloves. He thought, at the very least, the dog deserved to feel a warm human touch. He readied the needle. Animals suffered from the rash worse than people, since they didn't take baths. It was only dogs and cats. Dr. Crumley had seen many different infected animals, including hamsters, rabbits, a ferret, and even a skunk named Penelope. Sadly, he'd been unable to do anything for them except put a final end to their suffering. Over the past 2 weeks, he'd put down more than 20 pets. There had been one animal, however, that had shown no ill effects from the fuzzy mud. Dr. Crimley owned a land turtle named Maurice. Maurice had gotten stuck in a patch of fuzzy mud in his backyard, and he tried to pry him out with a shovel. 3 days later, the turtle still hadn't shown any symptoms of the rash. Peering through the microscope in a small office laboratory, Dr. Crumley had compared the samples of Maurice's skin with skin samples he'd taken from some of the other infected animals. He discovered an enzyme in Maurice's skin that didn't appear in any of the other animals' skin cells. Miss Marple turned her head toward him. "You're a good dog," he said. He inserted the needle into her right hind leg, injecting her with a concentration of the turtle enzyme. Chapter 35. Monday, December 6th. Tamaya was the first human test case. Her parents had spoken to the doctor in charge of the experiment, who had cautioned them that just because the cure had worked on animals, there was no guarantee that it would work on people, too. Still, what choice did they have? Tamaya tried not to let her get her hopes too high, although she was very glad to learn Miss Marple had made a full recovery. She loved that dog. She received 2 injections of the turtle enzymes each day. Various doctors and nurses were constantly coming into her hospital room to check on her. They also asked her name, which began to bug her after a while. She realized there were lots of other patients and the doctors were very busy, but still, it was a very important experiment. They could at least remember her name. She remembered that to Rhonda, her favorite nurse, who just laughed. "They know your name," Rhonda told her. "They're just testing your memory. Human beings don't normally have these types of enzymes in their bodies. The doctors are worried about possible bad side effects." "Maybe I'll grow a shell, like a turtle," Tamaya joked. Rhonda laughed again. "That'd be cute," she said, "and practical. Whenever I get tired, I get just duck inside my shell and go to sleep." Tamaya's other nurses tried to be cheerful and positive, but she could tell they were faking it. She didn't blame them. She realized how terrible she must look with no hair and her skin all blistered. But Rhonda didn't fake it. She talked and joked with Tamaya just like she was a normal person. Besides asking her to say her name, her doctors also had her tell them her address and phone number. They asked who George Washington was. They had her do math problems in her head. 5 times 7, 26 divided by 2. They listened to her heart and lungs. They took her temperature and checked her blood pressure. They made her walk around in a circle and touch her toes. She began to get better at identifying the various objects the doctor held in front of her face. Still, that didn't mean the treatment was necessarily working. After weeks of practice, her brain might simply have learned how to decipher the blurry images. She also hardly noticed the tingling sensation anymore, but again, that could have been because her brain had learned to block it out. "How long did it take for Miss Marple to get better?" she asked. "People and dogs are different," the doctor replied, not answering the question. She asked him about Chad, but was told that Chad had been moved to another part of the hospital. She worried about what that meant. She slept at odd times, never for very long. She was constantly being awakened, if not for a sponge bath, then for a shot or for more tests. One night, or it might have been during the day, she had a very odd dream. There was a man in her room. He didn't seem to be the doctor, but she didn't know who he was. He said his name was Fitzy. "That's a strange name." "I'm a strange person," he said with a laugh. Every time he spoke, his voice came from another part of the room. He could have just been moving around, but it gave Tamaya the impression of some kind of floating spirit. "You want anything?" he asked. "No, thanks." "You sure?" he asked. "When I say anything, I mean anything. I'm about to become really rich, like the richest man in the world, maybe." There was a sudden clattering noise. "What was that?" "Nothing," he said. It sounded like he was down on the floor now. "I just knocked over a jar of those wooden things you stick in your mouth and say, 'ah.' It sounds like you were putting them back in the jar. I don't want to make a mess." "You probably should throw them away," Tamaya told him. "I don't think you should put them in somebody's mouth after they've been on the floor." "Oh yeah," he agreed. She heard them being dumped into the garbage. "So can I buy you anything?" His voice was very, very close now. "No thanks." "I don't want anything either," he said. He sounded sad. "You'd think someone with lots of money would want to buy something, wouldn't you?" "Yes." "Well, I don't." His voice was now far away. "I just like figuring things out. I like science. Do you like science?" "It's okay." "What's your favorite subject?" "Reading, I guess," she told him. "I like to write, too. I think I want to be a writer someday." "That's good. You can still do that, can't you? I mean, even if you can't see, you can still talk into a computer, and it will write it for you." "I don't know. I write different than I talk." I know what you mean. I think different than I talk. It's like my brain's filled with all these ideas, but sometimes I don't even recognize the words that come out of my mouth. You make sense to me, said Tamaya. That's good. You sure I can't buy you anything? A piano, a grandfather clock? I just want to get better. Me too. I want everyone to get better. I want to help people, not start a worldwide epidemic. He sounded very sad. Tamaya wished there was something she wanted. Oh, I know, she remembered. I need a new school sweater. She woke up sometime after that, while Rhonda was giving her a sponge bath. She thought about her dream and asked, What's so funny? Rhonda asked, Nothing. A grandfather clock? A piano? The sponge bath felt nice. Often she didn't know if her eyes were open or shut. It was something she had to think about. She opened them now. The world was full of light and color. Rhonda had red hair and dark eyes. The walls were yellow. Tamaya started to tremble. What's wrong? Rhonda asked. Everything still looked very blurry, but it was a well-lit blur. Tamaya, are you okay? Rhonda asked again. She was afraid she might still be dreaming. She spoke tentatively, almost afraid that if she spoke, the world would go dark again. Rhonda, I can see you, she said, and when the world didn't disappear, she trembled even harder. I can see. Rhonda began shaking too. She hugged Tamaya very hard, which was against the rules. You need to call your mother, she declared. I'll get the doctor. You call your mother. She hugged Tamaya again, then got her cell phone for her from the table by the bed. What time is it? Tamaya asked. Are you sure it's not too late? It doesn't matter what time it is, Rhonda said. Call her now. At 3:45 in the morning, Tamaya's mother was startled awake by the ringing of the phone. Instantly, her heart filled with terror. It took all her courage to answer it, but she tried to prepare herself for the worst. Yes? Hey, Mom, guess what? Chapter 36. Snow. 2 days later, the first snow fell. Tamaya still couldn't make out the individual snowflakes, but she was able to see zigzagging streaks of gray and white outside her hospital window. It was beautiful. The whole world looked beautiful to her, even the bright green jello that came with her lunch, with coleslaw magically suspended inside. Rhonda led her onto the outdoor patio next to the cafeteria, wearing a ski hat over her closely cropped hair. She lay on the cement and caught snowflakes with her tongue. It snowed for 4 straight days. Tamaya learned that Marshall had begun getting Dr. Crumley's injections and that he was showing great improvement. Nobody seemed to know anything about Chad, and she was afraid to push it, afraid what she might find out. Her doctor gave her large black framed glasses that were too big for her face. Seeing him clearly for the first time, she nearly fainted. With soft brown eyes and curly hair, he was even cuter than Mr. Fricks. I get all flushed and tongue-tied when he looks at me, she told Monica over the phone. It's a good thing I didn't know what he looked like before. Everyone would have probably thought I had all kinds of horrible side effects. I probably would have forgotten my own name. Monica laughed. You don't sound so scared anymore, Tamaya noticed. I know, I think it's all the snow. I know the mud's still there underneath, but everything just seems safer. I'm just so happy you're almost all better. Tamaya could hear a crack in her best friend's voice. It sounded like she was crying. Tamaya started to cry too. Then they both laughed at the fact they were crying. They stayed on the phone a while longer, crying and laughing at the same time. One day in late December, Tamaya's doctor was checking her pulse while she watched television. A TV set hung from the ceiling in the corner of her hospital room. She could feel her heart rate quicken at his touch. She hoped it didn't throw off his measurements. Her TV program was interrupted by a breaking news story from Heathcliff. Her doctor let go of her wrist and picked up their mode. He raised the volume. A man was standing in the back of Woodridge Academy near the edge of the woods. He was surrounded by news reporters. The bar across the bottom of her TV identified him as Dr. Peter Smith, Deputy Director for the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention. It felt odd watching something on TV that was happening right at her school. Snow was falling outside her hospital window, and she could see it falling on the man on the TV. Tamaya thought he looked more like a lumberjack than a doctor. He had a thick, bushy beard and held a shovel. The man dug his shovel through the snow and then with his bare hand reached down and pulled up a big glob of black goo. Fuzzy mud, he said. Ice crystals stuck to his beard, and Tamaya could see his frozen breath as he spoke. I'm holding in my hand more than 1 billion of your so-called Frankengerms. Tamaya felt all tingling again, watching him hold the mud like she had once held it. I'm happy to report that every last one of them is dead. The organism cannot survive in sub-freezing temperatures. Tamaya and her doctor looked at each other. Could this really be true? Several of the reporters applauded, and Tamaya could hear cheers coming from other rooms in the hospital. "Does this mean the crisis is over?" a reporter asked. Before Dr. Smith answered, the bar of the bottom TV screen had already proclaimed, "Crisis over, Franken-germs all dead." Tamaya wondered how they could know for sure. Maybe the Franken-germs were just hibernating like bears. "How do you know they're not simply lying dormant?" a reporter asked, almost as if she was channeling Tamaya's thoughts. "How do you know they won't wake up again when the weather turns warmer?" "We've examined them in our labs. I've personally looked through a microscope and seen the disintegrated membranes. I assure you they will not wake up." Still, Tamaya wondered how he could know they were all dead. Maybe somewhere beneath all that snow there was one that was still alive. "Of course, the CDC will continue to monitor the situation," Dr. Smith said. "Although extremely unlikely, it is possible that another mutation could have occurred. Somewhere out here there may be one mutated organism capable of surviving the freezing cold. We'll know more after the snow melts." Chapter 37. Tuesday, December 30th. The quarantine was lifted. Under the direction of the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Crumbly's cure was mass-produced. It successfully treated more than 60,000 people and animals afflicted with the Diwali blister rash, the now official name that was the particular medical condition. Medical books were being updated with before and after photos of Tamaya Diwali's skin. 2 weeks after being discharged, Tamaya and Marshall returned to the hospital, this time as visitors. Tamaya brought jars of homemade strawberry jam, belated Christmas presents for her doctors and nurses. Marshall carried a plastic food container. Tamaya still wore glasses, but Monica had given her new ones for Christmas. The frames were neon green and semi-transparent. Monica told her that they were "très chic," French for very stylish. Tamaya's hair had begun to grow back. She wore a pink cap over what she called her fuzzy head. She had some scars on her hand and arm, which her doctor said would fade. There was a pock mark on her face, which her friend Summer insisted only made her prettier. "In order to be perfect, every woman needs an imperfection," Summer had told her. This sounded like an oxymoron to Tamaya, but it was still nice to hear. After Tamaya gave the strawberry jam to Rhonda said she had something for her too. She handed her a flat box. Tamaya opened it to find a new school sweater. "How'd you know?" She couldn't remember ever telling Rhonda about the sweater. "You shouldn't have. It's way too expensive." "It's not from me," Rhonda explained. "The box arrived here for you yesterday. I've been trying to figure out how to get it to you." Tamaya discovered a small card, which read, "For a girl of extraordinary virtue and valor." It was signed, "Your friend Fitzy." "Who's Fitzy?" Marshall asked, reading over her shoulder. "I thought I dreamed him," Tamaya answered, mystified. "Good thing I didn't ask for a piano." "What?" asked Marshall. Chad Hilgis was one of the few rash patients still in the hospital. The skin on his face had been so badly damaged, he had been put in a ward usually reserved for severe burn victims. The door opened as Tamaya knocked. "Hello?" she asked as she entered. Marshall was no longer with her. Chad was sitting up in bed, wearing green pinstriped pajamas. A ray of sunlight shone through the window, highlighting a shaft of dust particles and casting a glare across his heavily scarred face. He wore a pair of the hospital-issued black-framed glasses. Tamaya was happy to see the glasses. If he'd been blind, there would have been no need for them. "Tamaya," he said. She was afraid he might hate her again because of what she'd done to him, but he seemed glad to see her. "Hi, Chad." She set down her sweater box and stuck her hands into the back pockets of her jeans. "How are you doing?" "I'm not supposed to move my mouth too much," he said, keeping his face notably still as he spoke. "They had to take skin from another part of my body and put it on my face." "Oh," said Tamaya, "you still look like you," she assured him. "Just call me Buttface," he said. She was shocked. "You mean they—" She covered her mouth with her hand. "At least you think it's funny, instead of being all mad and everything." "Nothing makes me mad," he said. "It's weird. Ever since I could see again, the world just looks a lot better than it did before." "I know what you mean," Tamaya agreed. "Everything's beautiful." "I hope it lasts," said Chad. "Me too." She wasn't sure if Chad meant he hoped the world lasts, or if he hoped it continued to look beautiful. Either way, she agreed with him. The door pushed further open as Marshall backed his way into the room. He turned around, holding a tray with 3 plates of lasagna. "The nurses let me use the microwave." "Happy birthday!" exclaimed Tamaya. Chad didn't say anything. He stared at the food, then looked from Marshall to Tamaya and back to Marshall. "He's not supposed to talk," Tamaya told Marshall, and quietly whispered, His butt was transplanted onto his face. Chad pulled back his covers and slowly slid down from the bed. He stepped toward Marshall, who set down the tray and nervously backed away. It might have been all the talk about Frankengerms, but with his scarred and rigid face and his now outstretched arms, Tamaya thought Chad looked a little bit like the Frankenstein monster. Marshall backed up against the wall. Chad clasped Marshall by the shoulders, pulled him close, and hugged him. "Thanks, man," Chad said. Marshall twisted free. It was Tamaya's idea. Tamaya laughed at Marshall's awkwardness. She wondered why boys were always so weird about hugging, but then her heart stopped when Chad's eyes fixed on her. He opened his arms wide and said the same 3 words he'd said to her once before. "You're next, Tamaya." Chapter 38. Courage, Humility, and Grace. The following testimony is excerpted from the transcript of the Heathcliff disaster's hearing. "So when you returned from the woods to look for Chad, did you see more of the mud?" "Yes, just about everywhere. I looked, but there could have been more of it of the first day, too. I just didn't know to look for it then." "Please speak directly into the microphone, Tamaya. We're having trouble hearing you." "Sorry. I said the first time I went to the woods, I didn't know about the fuzzy mud, so I wasn't looking for it. All I could think about was wanting to get out of there." "Because it was against the rules to go into the woods?" "Because I wasn't allowed to walk home." "Hobson's choice." "I don't know what this is." "Hobson's choice. It's when you have to choose between 2 options and they're both bad." "Yes, they were both bad." "Well, Tamaya, speaking on behalf of this committee, we are very glad you chose to follow Marshall into the woods. The 2 of you may have saved the world." "But everyone got the rash because of me." "No, from everything the scientists told us, that would have happened anyway. Maybe a week or 2 later, and by then it would have been too late to contain it. The quarantine wouldn't have been in place. Someone could have stepped in the fuzzy mud, gotten on a plane and flown to Los Angeles, or Paris, or Hong Kong. We could have had a worldwide epidemic, like from Wuhan, and in places where the temperature never drops below freezing." "Thank you, Marshall and Chad. The country got an early warning." "You're a very brave young lady, Tamaya." "I wasn't brave. I was scared. Marshall's the brave one." "So how does it feel to have a disease named after you?" "It's a great honor, I guess."